All right. I don't know if everybody can hear me. Yes? All right. Well, I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this festival, which has been very exciting until now, and I'm sure that it will continue this way. And I will start right away by announcing that I'm not going to discuss, as I've been presented, I'm not going to discuss any specific film in particular, but what I intend to do is a transcendental approach to filmic representation itself from a phenomenological point of view, leaning on the work of Ernst Jünger. Because when we think about the implications of modern technology, we can think about that famous phrase coined by Marshall McLuhan during the 60s, which was, the medium is the message. Well, I want to think about the medium, which is film itself, not any particular film. I will lean on the work of Ernst Jünger, who was a soldier, as we have just been told, a soldier, writer, and philosopher. And I chose his work because he tried to develop a deep understanding of the changes that humanity was experiencing through the inclusion of technology in modern warfare and later on in the everyday life. I will start by reading a quote that he writes in a novel, one of his novels. And he says that during modern warfare in the trenches, people, and I quote, killed each other without seeing each other. An impact was received without knowing where it came from. So there is an uncanny invisibility that demanded a new way of seeing that the naked human eye was not capable of. And that is where the camera will enter the discussion. As I have said, the changes produced during war, according to Jünger's thought, are nothing but a symbol of the changes that humanity was experiencing as a whole. There was no place out of this process of technification and depersonalization that humanity was experiencing. And that is the meaning of a central concept of his thought, which is the total mobilization, the totale Mobilmachung in German. The metaphysical core of this process, it's what he called the Gestalt des Arbeiters, the figure of the worker, that every single human being represented not as an individual, but as a type. I will not develop an analysis of these concepts, but I will just present them because they allow us to understand what is the new way of seeing inaugurated by this era of the worker, by this technological civilization. So I will start presenting Jünger's theory of vision through photography and film. Then I will examine the consequences that it poses to the human being. And later on, I will offer some conclusions on the challenges and possibilities that film is facing nowadays regarding this topic. So, according to Jünger's philosophy of technology, there is a connection between technological inventions and changes experienced by the human being. His brother, who was also a philosopher, Friedrich Georg Jünger, wrote that, and I quote, "Photography could not have been invented before man became photographable, and it has developed later as man was photographed." According to this, then, it seems that there are some non-obvious conditions that the represented object must meet for it to be conceived as representable through photography or subsequently film. It is possible to examine these conditions by examining some of Jünger's works. In one of his most famous essays titled The Worker, Jünger presents a discussion of the completely technologized way of life expressed as the mobilization of the world by the metaphysical figure of the worker. In this theoretical frame, Jünger proposes that modern media, something that includes film, express the specific mechanisms of the age of the worker. And to explain this change, Jünger compares theater with film. According to Jünger, what makes theater and film different is not a quantitative aspect on the amount of technology that each one of them use, but a qualitative aspect, because they entail a certain way of representing reality. Jünger says that theater belongs to an outdated past, where the here and now experience would justify the assistance to a spectacle that sits entirely on the concept of unique execution, such as theater. But in a world that has been totally mobilized, in which people are no longer individuals but types, there are no individual values to be found. There is no here and now experience. So there is only the possibility to embody a typical way of existence. And the type is the concept that defines this anonymous and massified existence. So when Jünger asks, which one of these two mediums, theater or film, is the sharpest representative of the type? Well, the answer to him is clear. It is clearly film. Jung explains this idea, exemplifying it with a very specific type of comedy. During the 30s, he writes, "Our time has produced a particular genre of comedy whose comical aspect is that the human being appears as a ball with which some technological objects play." We could think about Modern Times, for example, by Chaplin. Jung's point here is that film's adaptation to an automatized world is more evident in films where the human being appears as a creature dominated by its own inventions. If a premise like that one arouses laughter in the viewer, it is because the viewer knows what is the specific behavior that that technological environment demands from him, while the film character does not, and therefore suffers from the environment's hostility. So Jung concludes, it is the type that laughs at the expense of the individual. This allows us to understand that technological civilization contains certain rules and certain rhythms that are revealed through its creations. For example, if it is possible to represent reality through apparatuses that enable mechanical reproduction, it is because the represented object must be itself mechanically reproducible. This is not the case with the individual, but with the type. And what does this reproducibility imply? Well, to understand this, I will read a quote that Jung wrote in his diary after watching a film that depicted the explosion of a factory in 1944 during the last moments of the Battle of Stalingrad. He wrote, "It is very frightening and very real, the eternal return in its greyest form. Dying in the ice returns and returns again and again in a monotonous repetition, without sublimation, without afterglow, without consolation. What is the glory and the fame there?" he asks. In this fragment, Jung is linking Nietzsche's idea of the eternal return with film. The dissolution of that here and now, that Walter Benjamin called the aura, the dissolution of that here and now produces a decontextualization of the instant. The specific space and time in which the film action takes place is substituted by its insertion into in a planetary transmission space and a closed cyclical time, which enables the unlimited reproduction of the event through the apparatus. It seems then that both an abstract space and a repeatable time are the two a priori conditions that the technological era demands for its objects to be represented through its new eye, which is the camera lens. Such mechanism is particularly striking when we are photographing or filming a painful event that involves the human being, such as war. The fact that a painful event can be decontextualized and transformed into an image, both static in photography and dynamic in film, is what allows Jung to affirm that seeing has become, and I quote, an act of aggression. The consequences of this way of seeing for man or for humanity have been analyzed by Martin Heidegger when he read some of Jung's books. The most important thing of Heidegger's reading is that he very clearly locates when this particular way of representing reality was originated. He writes it in a text titled "The Age of the World Picture." He says, I quote, "The very essence of man himself changes in the moment that man becomes subject, because man becomes the relational center of that which is as such, thus Sayananda. The peculiar representation produced by technology, then, is the consummation of this total centrality of the human being as a subject in the production of the represented object. The world of the worker, which Jung described, is founded, according to Heidegger, in modern metaphysics, in the sense of man as subjectum, and the interpretation of being just as representability. According to Heidegger, then, that thing that Jung identifies as a distinctive feature of the modern world was already present in modern Western metaphysics, at least since Descartes established the ego cogito as the self-certainty of subjectivity. Because when Descartes did that, the represented object was no longer what is present, which Heidegger calls as Anwesende, but what is in the opposite front of representation, what is in front, the Gegenständige. Right there is where the basis of the way in which the modern technological civilization represents has to be found. then that is why, according to Junger, the way in which the worker represents reality, it is an intrinsically dominating way of representing reality, that act of aggression. That is why we can now better understand how he describes photography as an attack with optical media, because the cold gaze of the camera is the ultimate form of modern metaphysics, of modern epistemology, because it objectifies what appears before the lens. As I have said, this is especially more important when we are representing the human being, who is also included in the objectifiable world, in that he is representable through the camera. In a text titled The Overcoming of Metaphysics, Heidegger says that in the order of the transcendental genesis of the object, the subject is the first object of the ontological representation. So subjectivity turns itself into a knowable and therefore controllable object. This was made clear by Junger in his war experience, where the human beings were considered part of the material thrown into the action. He wrote that the camera was the appropriate organ to capture this new human being, because he says that the camera can capture, and I quote, the bullet in its trajectory, as well as the human being in the instant when an explosion tears him apart. There is some kind of transparency then that the technological gaze produces, but this kind of transparency also involves a certain opacity, and this is what I will try to discuss now. In 1941, Junger wrote, quote, "The lifeless camera lens does not capture the essential and miraculous. If this is not the case, it is because there are some substantial depths of reality that cannot be grasped as objects, but only as a mystery, as something that is an ungraspable object." This idea appears again in Junger's books when he says that film, specifically film, has a demystifying effect, and that the attempt to film Golgotha fails to achieve credibility. It borders on blasphemy. So it seems that the sacred dimension of life escapes the possibility of being captured by the camera. This invention then belongs to that immanent world of mechanisms and technology. But there is one last question to answer. Does film really has nothing more to offer than a repetitive and demystified picture of the world? Well, from what I have said until this moment, it would seem that I believe that that is the case. However, I think that this is very dramatically not the case. And I will try to explain why. Even though film, as part of the technological civilization, does in fact reproduce its mechanisms, this is not the biggest risk that we are facing. To put it with Heidegger's words, what is truly unsettling is not that the world is becoming a completely technical world. It remains more unsettling that man is not prepared for this transformation of the world, that we are still not capable, through reflective thinking, of arriving at an adequate confrontation with what is emerging in this age. Therefore, there is a permanent risk posed by technological civilization, which consists in turning reality into a repeatable and abstract image, controllable as a standing reserve, as a Bestand, as Heidegger called it. Of course, this affects the human being in that we usually represent the human being through technological apparatuses. Therefore, it would seem that film can genuinely contribute to forgetting every aspect of reality that does not adapt to the conditions that I have explained. But there is a verse that both Junger and Heidegger knew quite well, written by Hölderlin, that said that where the danger is, also lies the saving power. So let's examine this topic from that perspective. Because the danger of reducing reality to its image through technology is nowadays greater than ever. Since cameras have become almost universally available by their inclusion in mobile phones, everyone has become used to the world as an image. And in fact, we are constantly taking part on a never-ending film made from fragmentary videos and photos that we capture every day, that we post online every day. So in this context, it is urgent to perceive that this technological reproduction of reality can lead to the confusion of things themselves with their images. But it is impossible for us to retreat to a pre-technological world. This is nothing more of a romantic illusion. We must live in this world in which we are already living in. but we must also keep some distance from it. And that is what Junger tried to express by recommending a serene skepticism inside the technological world, something that relates to Heidegger's Gelassenheit. This way, an approach towards film different from the objectifying one is possible. This invites us to recognize that every representation of reality as an image falls short in some way. When reality is represented as an object, something escapes from our gaze. And in the technological way of seeing, that unobjectifiable dimension is actually present, but it is present in the form of an absence. In this way, film allows us to understand reality not just as an object, but as an immeasurable horizon of meaning, and film actually does this. And this is the only way to save film from being just a way of demystification, of painting a world picture, as Heidegger said, because it enables the possibility to experience every single one of its answers as questions. From this critical approach, then, film might be able to accomplish that task which Junger saw linked to literature, and exclusively literature, which consists in, and I quote, elevating the waves of light and the beams of rays to the level of images in order to make designs full of meaning shine. Thank you very much for your listening and your attention.